Welcome to today's Learn at Lunchtime program. Our topic today is snakes of Pennsylvania, and with us is Kathy Gipe, who is the herpetologist and non-game biologist for Pennsylvania's Fish and Boat Commission. Hello, Kathy. Thank you for presenting today's program.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So tell us about yourself and the work you do with the Pennsylvania's Fish and Boat Commission.
Sure. I've been doing this for about 20 years now in Pennsylvania as the herpetologist and non-game biologist in the natural diversity section in the Division of Environmental Services of the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission. And I'll talk a little bit more about what our section does in my slide presentation, but I do a variety of things. I work statewide, working on conservation and management of all of Pennsylvania's reptiles and amphibians. That includes like doing inventory for rare species, sitting at my desk and working on reports and management plans, coordinating with other states and agencies within Pennsylvania, to work towards conservation and management of these species. So a big part of what I do is environmental review. So for any of our listed threatened or endangered species in the state, we are involved in the permit review process for any kind of development or things that need permits from the Department of Environmental Protection to make sure that those activities are not impacting our listed species of reptiles, amphibians, fish, aquatic invertebrates, or other.
So the Fish and Boat Commission has jurisdiction over reptiles, amphibians, aquatic invertebrates, and fish within the Commonwealth, which include snakes. So what, in your opinion, makes snakes interesting?
A host of things. I mean, I think that all wildlife is interesting, really, but the snakes and the other reptiles and amphibians, I like to talk about the many ways that they're adapted to their environment and how each one is slightly different as far as what it eats, where it lives, what type of habitat it's in, and how the ways that its body is formed or the way that it behaves helps it live in that situation. It's just really interesting to learn about that.
So let's get started with today's program to find out more.
Well, this is an introductory slide. We've already gone over that, but I will also add that in addition to working for the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission, I am part of the Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program, which is a partnership of agencies and biologists around the state that are all working towards inventory, management, and conservation of our rare natural heritage or species of plants, animals, even ecological communities. So, and an important partner in that program is the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy that I'm also involved with. As I mentioned, I work for the natural diversity section in the Fish and Boat Commission, and our section really focuses on the non-game species that are involved and under the jurisdiction of Fish and Boat. These include amphibians and reptiles, as also, of course, fish, but we have a lot of non-game fish that we cover, also aquatic invertebrates, especially freshwater mussels. And all the activities that we do in the section is working towards protecting these taxa, including involving developing and overseeing regulations, environmental review of permits and projects, also collection permits. If people need to do research or collect any of these species above and beyond what a fishing license allows, we have permit programs for that. And finally, we do as much as we can. We spend time on research and education and outreach that can expand everyone's knowledge of the importance of these species. So what are herps? People talk about herps as it's a term that we use collectively for amphibians and reptiles. Also, it could be said herptiles or herpetofauna. Amphibians in this state includes our frogs, our toads, salamanders, and then reptiles are the lizards, snakes, and turtles. Other folks, when I do education programs, a lot of kids want to talk about alligators. The crocodilians are another group of reptiles, but they're not represented in Pennsylvania, so they're not going to be part of my talk. What distinguishes amphibians and reptiles from each other? Amphibians tend to have moist skin. Reptiles, even though they have shiny skin, it's actually dry and it's covered with scales, and these scales protect them from the heat and dryness of their environment. The amphibians have no claws on their toes. Reptiles, when they have toes, have claws. This includes your turtles and your lizards especially. Each of their toes will have a claw on it. Amphibians lay eggs that don't have shells. They're sort of in a gelatinous mass. If you can picture like frog eggs in a pond, you know they're kind of soft and squishy. Reptile eggs are a little bit more like bird eggs. They do have shells, even though they are softer than most bird eggs. Amphibians also have young that have gills. And this is also part of the whole like aquatic and moist nature of amphibians' natural history. They typically have a life history that has different stages. So for example, a tadpole, when it hatches out of an egg, doesn't look like the adult frog that it will then turn into. Whereas reptiles, when they're born, they basically look like the adult form, with the exception of some color variation. So we're going to talk a little bit about sort of highlight some of the species of snakes in Pennsylvania, not all of them. And hopefully during the course of this talk, I'm going to answer some questions you might have about the number of snakes in Pennsylvania, how many venomous snakes we have in Pennsylvania, which snake is the meanest, and which snake is the best actor, among other things that I'm going to go over. So to answer that first question, in Pennsylvania, we have 21 different species of snakes. 3 of these are listed in our regulations as being endangered species in the state, one of which is also listed at the federal level. And these species represent 2 different families and 16 genera or genuses, and that's part of like the scientific classification of how related animals are to each other. We do have 3 venomous snakes in Pennsylvania. We have the timber rattlesnake, which more people probably encounter than the other 2, the copperhead, and the eastern Massasauga. And the Massasauga is one of our endangered species. It only occurs in a few locations in a couple of counties in the western part of the state. They're very elusive and shy and small, and very few people will ever encounter one of these snakes. The timber rattlesnake, on the other hand, is more commonly encountered because of their prevalence in Pennsylvania's woods and places where people go to recreate, and the trails and the mountains of Pennsylvania. They can be distinguished by other rattlesnakes in different parts of the United States by their V-shaped crossbands, not diamonds like the diamondback rattlesnake of the southern US. There's 2 different color forms, the dark and the light, or we call them black and yellow phase. It's not really a phase, they're either born one or the other, and it's mostly what you're looking at to distinguish the color is the head color. They do have black tails, and then the body color really can vary sometimes in between individuals. They can grow up to 5 feet long, and they're a sit and wait predator. We'll talk about that a little bit on the next slide. You can also see in these photos some of the classic habitat of timber rattlesnakes. They occur in most of our forested and mountainous areas towards the upper portion of the slopes, along benches, high plateaus, points, talus slopes like you see here, rock outcrops. Most of these really rocky open habitats are associated with a phase of their life that primarily is for basking. Basking in the sun allows reptiles to absorb the UV and the heat that is needed for all of their bodily processes of digestion and reproduction and just general health. So they need open sunny areas to bask, but then also gestation. And gestation is a word for basically rearing young. A female snake that a female rattlesnake actually gives live birth, and she'll spend all summer before giving birth gestating, which basically is spending the time in these sunny openings and soaking up the sun that helps her grow the young inside her. So the gestation and basking sites have a south or southwestern exposure to get the maximum sunlight, and they need openings in the forest canopy for that. A little bit about the timber rattlesnake life history. They have sort of a cyclical history, and a lot of this habitat or these habits apply to most snakes that we'll talk about. They do overwinter, mostly underground. So in the spring, they emerge from their den in mid-April to May, depending on the elevation and part of the state. Depends on how early they'll come out. In the summer, they start moving away from the den, finding different areas to bask. They move gradually further away from the den in search of prey and mates. And then late summer, the males start to return to the den first, and then the gravid or pregnant females give birth near the den. And then in the fall, they return back to the original den area to overwinter. So timber rattlesnakes and our other venomous snakes in Pennsylvania are what I call sit and wait predators. They prey on mice, voles, chipmunks, birds, weasels, squirrels, and they'll stay stationary along what they think is a travel corridor for these rodents, as the picture shows here. They just sit and wait until the mouse, let's say, will run past it. They can sense the body of the mouse with heat sensing pits that are in the sides of their head, and that's when they'll strike at it. The importance of them eating all of these rodents can't be understated. There was a study by the University of Maryland that showed that each timber rattlesnake can remove more than 2,500 ticks from its habitat per year. These ticks being particularly, the primary host of the ticks being the white-footed mouse, which is one of the primary prey items of the timber rattlesnake. So if anybody spends time in our woods and you know that you have to worry about tick bites and the diseases that they carry, so you can be grateful that timber rattlesnakes and other snakes are out there trying to keep control over the rodent population. The other venomous snake that is most common in Pennsylvania is the copperhead. This one has a copper or orange colored head, a mottled gray or brown belly, no checkerboard, and I'll show you later why that's important. They're smaller than the timbers. They're up to about 4 feet in length, and they're widely distributed in Pennsylvania. However, very few people tend to see copperheads. They have excellent camouflage for the leaf litter and rocky areas that they tuck into. They don't rattle like timber rattlesnakes, but they're also just super shy and secretive. And both of these species would rather avoid humans rather than attack them. There was a study that in Maryland that they experimented with copperheads in particular and tested them as far as with an experimental foot and an experimental hand. And they showed that only 2 out of about 69 copperheads struck at the foot or the hand during this experiment. So it was just a way of demonstrating that even though the venomous snakes can be dangerous, if they do bite, they're very unlikely to bite humans unless they're provoked. However, so what do you think is the grumpiest snake in Pennsylvania? Is it one of the 2 that I just spoke about? Actually, it's not. It's our northern water snake, which is a non-venomous snake. This snake can grow up to 2 to 5 feet in length. It has wide dark bands on a gray or tan belly, and sort of has bands in the front of its belly that then switch to just blotches that are alternating on the back end of the body. The scales on the body of snakes, when you're working on snake identification, they're described as keeled or not keeled. So that's basically the sort of that circular part of the snake that looks like, the little scales. There can be a line down the middle, and that's the keel. It's a ridge. So we'll talk about that with some of the other snake IDs that in this presentation. So the water snake, of course, lives around water. They primarily eat fish and amphibians. And unfortunately for them, they're often mistaken for copperheads, and folks that have a fear of the venomous snakes will persecute the water snakes when they think that it's a copperhead. The water snake does have an reputation as being aggressive and grumpy. However, it doesn't have fangs and it doesn't have venom. So even if it were to bite someone, it just causes, it can bleed. You can bleed from it, but you just do a little bit of first aid and you're fine. So here's another illustration of the difference between a copperhead and a water snake. So the copperhead is on the top left, and you can see the bands on the copperhead are wide on the sides and narrow on the backbone or the top of the snake. Whereas with the water snake, they're wide on the top and narrow on the sides. Towards the tail on the water snake, as I said, the pattern sort of changes and it's alternating blotches instead of those bands. Another illustration of how to tell a venomous snake from a non-venomous snake. We get these questions all the time. In Pennsylvania, our 3 venomous snakes are in the pit viper family. So they have those heat-sensing pits on the sides of their face, and they have a vertical pupil, sort of like a cat's eye. All of our non-venomous snakes have a round pupil, just like a human eye. People say that, well, I mean, it's true, the venomous snakes have sort of a triangular head. However, when threatened, some of our non-venomous snakes will sort of puff up their head and make it so people have trouble with that characteristic. Sometimes they think that a snake is venomous just using that triangular head characteristic. So it's probably not the best one to use as the primary characteristic. If you had the snake in hand, you could also look at the bottom of the tail at the base of the scales. Our venomous snakes have scales in a single row on the tail, whereas the non-venomous snakes have sort of a zipper double row. And that can be seen better in these photographs. On the left are non-venomous snakes. You see that zipper tail, whereas on the right is a pit viper with the single row of scales in its tail. And again, looking at the pupil, non-venomous on the left is a round pupil, and venomous on the right is a cat's eye or a vertical pupil. All right, so we got through the venomous stuff. I know everybody always wants to talk about that. Let's talk about some of the diversity of other species in the state that you really have nothing to worry about and are really quite interesting. One of our more common non-venomous snakes is the eastern milk snake. These snakes can be up to 3 to 4 feet in length. And this one does have a checkerboard pattern on the belly, as you can see in this photo here. Again, milk snakes especially are often confused with copperheads. So people have a greater fear of them than they need to. They're very common. They often end up in people's houses and basements because they're going after their favorite prey, which are rodents. And they'll enter through, so they're common around farms and housing areas especially. But as you can see here with them in hand, they're pretty harmless. This is one of our biggest, this is probably our biggest snake, the northern black racer, can be up to 8 feet long. The black racer is one that's important to note this type of scales they have, and these have smooth scales with no keel. It makes them sort of shiny in appearance, and they're black almost all over, with the exception of a white chin and throat. And they have no real underlying patterns or markings. This is different though. When they are young, they do have a pattern. There are several snakes that look like this when they're young: the milk snake, the black racer, the rat snake. So that can be confusing for identification. But they lose that pattern as they grow. And here's some close-ups of the smooth scales and the dark blue or dark belly. This is particularly a contrast to similar eastern rat snake. This is sort of our other black snake in Pennsylvania, probably more common than the racer, also up to 8 feet in length. And the rat snake does have keeled scales, so it gives it a duller appearance and not as shiny. And it usually retains this underlying pattern that it has when it's a juvenile. So even the large adults like this one pictured still has a little bit of an underlying mottled pattern. They're excellent climbers. You can find them in trees. They have the modified scales on their belly that help them sort of grip and attach to things so that they can climb up and down trees. And they're a constrictor snake. So in addition, they actually kind of squeeze their prey. And here you have some close-up pictures of the juvenile pattern that, again, it's similar to the racer, it's similar to the milk snake, but there are some fine points that can distinguish it. One of my favorite snakes is, I think it's our best actor. It's the eastern hognose. These snakes have a pointed upturned snout that makes them very distinctive looking. They're short, about 2 to 3 feet in length. And as you see in this picture, they can sort of, when they're feeling threatened, they can form their head into a hood that people think looks like a cobra. They're widely distributed across parts of the state, but they're not super abundant. They need a particular habitat type with sandy soils and some canopy openings, and otherwise a variety of habitats. They do have very many color variations from orange to black. And their prey, it's interesting, they're toad specialists. So they'll eat other amphibians and things, but their favorite prey is American toads. Now, toads, when they're being attacked, will sort of puff up with air as a defensive mechanism. But the eastern hognose is specifically adapted for eating them because they have these fangs that you can see in the rear of their mouth that we think is actually used for kind of popping the toads so that they can go down easier. I think that's pretty cool. The other interesting thing about the hognose is, as I said, they're the best actors. So in addition to flattening their necks and rearing up, looking like a mean cobra, they'll hiss. If that doesn't work when they're trying to avoid a predator, they'll actually roll over and play dead. They do this whole dramatic scene where they regurgitate their meal, they'll musk and cover themselves with a little bit of stink. And then this is a picture depicting them playing dead, where actually that snake is perfectly healthy and fine. Oh, why did it do that? Okay, all right. The eastern garter snake. I'm sure most of you have seen one of these at some point. They're super common, often occur in people's yards and gardens, but also along trails, streamside, or in the woods, just about any habitat in Pennsylvania. The garter snake is distinctive by 3 light rows or stripes down the back, 2 rows of alternating black spots between the stripes. And interestingly, so most snakes lay eggs, but the garter snakes give live birth and can have up to 40 young, which is pretty amazing for a snake that size. There's a lot of variation in color, from greens to browns to oranges. Here's another picture showing the 3 stripes and the sort of checkerboard in between. Similar, close relative to the eastern garter snake is our ribbon snake. They're longer than garter snakes. The tail part of the snake is more than 1/3 of the body length. And it has more of a contrast between the stripes than the regular garter snake, with 3 bright yellow stripes. And they also have a different habitat that they really are mostly, they prefer wetlands. They're mostly found in wetlands and near water. And they like to eat salamanders. The northern ringneck snake is one of our smaller snakes. You can often, if you're in sort of an old field or edge habitat, you can flip logs and rocks and find these curled up underneath them. Their maximum length is 2 feet, but most of them are closer to about 1 foot long. They're very common. Yellow, really bright, pretty orange or yellow ring around the neck, which is also the color of the belly. And as you can see by these handling pictures, these snakes are so small, your mouth can't really even get around your finger. But they're the one defensive mechanism that most snakes will do rather than biting is to musk. They can spray sort of a stinky spray out of their vent that smells a bit skunky, and it'll get on your hands, and it's not very pleasant. So that's one of the main things that their smaller snakes do to defend themselves. Another one of our smaller snakes is the Decay's brown snake. Very just generally brown all over. It does have a dark bar behind the eye and 2 parallel rows of dark spots down the back. Brown snakes are very common. They can be found in similar habitats to the ringnecks and underneath rocks and logs, and along sort of edge habitats especially. A lot of these small snakes will eat just about anything, but they will focus on insects or small rodents, amphibians, like I said. And then finally, our other smallest, most common snake is the red-bellied snake. This one is generally brown in appearance, but it has a red belly with no spots, and it has a single black line between the belly and the side, sort of separating those out. And it also has several dark stripes down the back. These are very common, a little bit more, tending more to be in mountainous areas, but again, you can find them under rocks and logs. So you see all these pictures I'm showing of people holding snakes. Is that legal? Can you take it home and keep it for a pet? These are questions that sometimes people ask. And the first thing to know with the Fish and Boat Code is that you need to distinguish whether it's native or not. We actually don't have regulations over non-native species of reptile or amphibians. So if you really wanted to have a pet snake, the easiest approach would be to go to a pet store and get something that's not native to the state and would be captive bred, and you would know then that it could be raised in captivity safely. But if you were really keen on some of the snakes in Pennsylvania, you need to understand the possession limits in our section 79.3 of the code. The basics are that any endangered or species is limited to 0 take. They're protected fully and can't be handled or taken home. We also have a list of species that we think are at risk or declining or sensitive to collection, and so this limit on those is also 0. And then there are some native species that you could keep. The limit is 1. And in order to find out more about that, when you get a Pennsylvania fishing license, you get a summary book. And on page 18 or thereabouts is all of the regulations about reptiles and amphibians. And that will tell you if there's seasons on them or what kind of daily limit they have. But I encourage people to get involved as observers and just participators in the environment, not looking at everything as potential pet. But we have currently a reptile amphibian survey, sort of an atlas project. It's a citizen science project, and this is the URL for it. It's a contract run by Fish and Boat and the Mid-Atlantic Center for Herpetology and Conservation hosts the survey and has a website that interfaces with it. So you can go to this website to get county maps of where the different species are found, look at pictures that other people have uploaded, but you can participate however you want. There's a button on this page that you can submit an email if you see an interesting snake and you want to share it with us to let us know where it occurs. You can email it to the PARS website. All you need is a photo that has all the identifying characteristics in it and the location. And the specific locations are kept secret, so individual participants can protect their data, and also so that we can protect locations of rare species. But you can see them at the county level and sometimes smaller. Also part of that website, there's a great guide for identification of various snakes and the other reptiles and amphibians of Pennsylvania. So that's a good resource. Another resource, if you're looking for more information that I haven't been able to go over today, we have our website. And if you, at the top of the website, you click on the conservation tab, There's all kinds of options there. Specifically, there's a page that's dedicated to reptiles and amphibians that includes a link to our reference book, as well as photos and descriptions of each of our species, frequently asked questions, and some of our regulatory information. And that's the end of my presentation. I think we have some time for questions, and thank you very much.
All right, great. Yes, we do have several questions that are in the chat. So first question, are water moccasins found in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, I should say yes. Yes, we have that question commonly. No, we do not have water moccasins, and we don't have cottonmouths either. Those are southern snakes, and they're venomous species of the southern states. A lot of people just colloquially call our northern water snake a water moccasin or a cottonmouth, but as I said in the presentation, it's non-venomous, and the proper name for it is the northern water snake.
Right. But a couple of questions about rattlesnakes. One of the questions was, can you determine the age of a rattlesnake by counting the rattles?
No, actually, you can't. So all snakes and other reptiles shed their scales. So in order to grow, they actually need to, so they grow a new skin, and they'll shed their outer skin. Each time that they shed, the rattlesnakes actually add a little button to their rattle. And sometimes just, through trauma in the habitat or some other reason, the rattle will break off. So a healthy snake can shed up to 3 or 4 times a season. So you really can't count the rattles as a way of aging the snake.
With that rattlesnake question, can they live without their rattle tail? What if it's ripped off?
They can live without the rattle, but not, some people who are wantonly killing snakes will chop off the tail in order to take the rattle, and they can't live with that kind of an injury. But yeah, like I said, the rattle itself is just made of keratin, and it can break off if it gets stuck in a bush or gets trapped under a rock or something, and that's fine.
All right, so keep on with the rattlesnake questions. Do they hibernate? And do they share their dens or anything with other snakes or other rattlesnakes?
Yes, so our reptiles hibernate. They don't necessarily hibernate in the biological sense that mammals do. It's more called brumation, but we call it overwintering for the snakes. They go where it's underground, where they can regulate their body temperature so that they won't freeze. But so there's usually association with some kind of underground water source that keeps the constant temperature of the groundwater. So the snakes are often associated with that groundwater. It keeps them at about, in the 40s or 50s Fahrenheit. And they just, everything slows down. Their body functions, their circulation, breathing, it all just slows down so that they can get through the winter without needing to eat. And the communal den, yes. Multiple species use multiple dens, even species that might not get along during the active season. In rattlesnake dens, you can find copperheads, black rat snakes, garter snakes, racers, all kinds of different snakes will use the same den.
Right. Oh, more rattlesnake questions. What would you do if this says dog, but dog or person gets bit by a rattlesnake?
The main thing is to just get to a medical facility as quickly as possible. So there's been a lot of sort of different rumors or methods of dealing with a snake bite. People talk about sucking the venom out or putting a tourniquet on the wound. Most of modern first aid recommendations are really just to dress the wound as you would any other, and just get to the facility as quickly as possible.
Have you noticed any southern reptile species migrating to the north?
Not
Especially with
migrating,
climate
being
change?
introduced. So we do have a lot of non-native introduced species that are most likely have been released from people having them as pets. In particular, the red-eared slider turtle is distributed across the Pennsylvania at this point, even though it's native to the Midwest and the South. It's actually an invasive species across most of the world. It's very common as a pet. And what people don't realize when they get a reptile as a pet is that they actually live a really long time and they get bigger and bigger. So sliders in particular are a turtle that you buy when it's super cute, and then it gets to be really big and needs a bigger tank and needs to be cleaned. And people will think that they're doing it a favor by setting it free. Sometimes they will survive and maybe it's good for that individual, but it can have a really big impact on the environment and the other species that are in that area, but because it doesn't belong there. Most of the non-native reptiles that might be tropical or from the south don't usually survive our winters.
Right. Oh, let's see. I've just got lots and lots of questions. Let's see. Next one. Have you ever seen a copperhead?
Yes, definitely.
Wow.
We actually do targeted surveys for snakes in order to monitor populations. Primarily, we're doing those focusing on timber rattlesnakes, but the copperheads are also in some of the same environments, and we'll see them at the same time.
All right. So we have had a couple of different questions and variations on this, but so if you should see a snake, what is the best way if you should need to pick them up, move them, something like that?
Well, the main thing is that if you see a snake and you are afraid of it, is just to back up and give it about 2 or 3 feet and walk around it. For example, if you were to see a rattlesnake on a trail. But if there was something, let's say there was a milk snake in your basement and you didn't want it there, you can grab an empty trash can and a broom and sweep it in there and then carry it outside that way. You can pick snakes up with sort of a hook or a long stick to shoo them across a road if you're trying to help them across the road. They can tense up the muscles in their body and be able to just be held by a single hook without it damaging them.
We've had a couple of questions about the live births with snakes. How's that work? How many snakes do that? Do all snakes do that?
Can you repeat that? And what kind of snakes?
Well, the question about the live birth. What types of snakes do live births? How about, how does that go about working for snakes?
Yeah, so I mean, it's depending on which species it is. Some species, they'll lay eggs in a hole and bury it. And then some species do give live birth, so they'll spend the summer when those eggs actually develop into juveniles inside their bodies, just like a pregnancy, and then like late August or September is when the young emerge out the same hole that everything else comes out.
All right. So, can you, by looking at a snake, tell if it's a boy or a girl, or how do you go about doing that?
You can. It's dependent on the length of the snake, the length of the tail. And some of them, it's not easy to see that, and you actually could do some kind of probe of its insides to kind of figure out the anatomy of the inside. That's what some of the scientists will do. With the timber rattlesnakes, we actually you can get a permit to hunt timber rattlesnakes, but that is limited to males. Females are no take, and the hunters have to be able to distinguish males from females. Those scales that I was showing pictures of, distinguishing from venomous to non-venomous, the scales sort of below the vent or the cloaca are called subcaudal scales, and you can count those and to determine whether it's a male or a female.
All right. So This one's a Wikipedia. Let's answer Wikipedia if they're right or not. But it says garter snakes have venom, which is injected by grooved teeth at the back of the jaw, harmless to humans. True?
Yes, several of our snakes have some kind of, it's not venom in the sense that the pit vipers have venom, but they will have like some kind of venom or toxin. The hognose snakes have it too, that impacts their prey species, but it's not injected with their teeth. Like they don't have fangs. They have more like serrated teeth. Like if you were bit by a garter snake, it would feel like somebody had rubbed sandpaper on you.
All right, so you've probably seen this in movies where they tell you that if you've been bit by a venomous snake, you should suck it out. True? Not true?
Not true.
Not true.
At least
Movies. Um,
you really need to get the anti-venom from the hospital.
oh, here's another myth one. Can black snakes chase away or eat rattlesnakes?
The black racers are predators of other snake species in particular, and they can eat a young rattlesnake.
Mm.
But in general, so rattlesnakes aren't trying to eat other snakes. They're really rodent eaters. So the other types of snakes don't have much need to chase them away.
Do any snakes eat other snakes? That was another question somebody asked.
Yes, yes.
Okay. On the eastern, I always pronounce this wrong, the eastern Masagua, pronounce that for me?
Massasauga.
Masagua. What is their population now? How are they doing?
We have a couple of sites where they have been a steady, strong population over many decades, and they're doing okay. They're on protected land. But in general, their population range has shrunk over the decades in Pennsylvania. We're definitely down to only a handful of sites, and those sites need a lot of management. They need the open habitats to bask in and to gestate. And so if you protect an area or you have an old field and you just leave it alone, over time, it's going to grow up into shrublands and then forest lands. And this actually is a problem for the Massasauga. They need it to be more prairie-like. So we actually do a lot of active management in order to maintain their habitat and keep them going.
All right, back to our rattlesnakes. They're very, very popular. What determines if a rattlesnake is born yellow or black?
Just a genetic, it's like being blonde or brunette.
Mm.
Most of our surveys have shown across the state, we're about half and half. But yeah.
Yeah. Our last question is, what is your favorite snake and why?
The eastern hognose, just because of its adaptations, and I think it's kind of funny when it does all of the playing dead stuff.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a great presentation. And we look forward to hearing more about it. Check out more of our Learn at Lunchtime programs. And everybody have a wonderful weekend.